Tim, tell us about your story. So, 18-year-old Tim, what was he doing?
So I was always a bit of a computer nerd, and I did my first degree in
You're still pretty nifty on computers.
Well, I'm not too bad. But, so I did computer science and came out of university and did a bit of traveling. I went on one of these expeditions with Rally International as a youth development charity. And I decided I don't want to be stuck in an office, and I had quite naive and cliche idea of becoming a doctor and saving the world, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I started studying medicine, and it wasn't after very long that I started looking at the sort of the medical paradigm and just thinking, a lot of this doesn't make sense to me, because we seem to be masking symptoms a lot of the time instead of dealing with root causes, and that's making a lot of money for people. And not just that, the whole medical system, it's sort of built into specializations, which sort of blinker the people for firefighting, again, symptoms, rather than actually zooming out and looking at the big picture. And as I started working, this belief and ideas was reinforced really by what I was seeing on the ground, on the wards. And so, as it happens, I didn't really climb the ladder in medicine. I've continued to work in emergency departments as on a locum basis, and I've continued doing systems analysts and other projects, like I've been renovating the church here and doing other business interests, I suppose. And that's given me quite a multifaceted view, again, that sort of big picture view. Yeah. And I think this whole COVID debacle was ready to happen, because I think that there's a bigger problem with this sort of siloing of trusting experts, is that they're basically trying to always solve one face of a Rubik's Cube while they're messing up the other sides of the Rubik's Cube, if that makes sense.
Because they haven't got the whole picture.
They haven't got the whole picture, so they're just trying to focus on their one bit, and what they don't realise is that they're completely ruining the other faces. And we need to have this more holistical view of health, and if we don't change out of that way, this interventionist thinking that we can meddle with complex systems without causing massive collateral damage elsewhere, if we can't realise that, we're going to cause a lot of destruction.
That's part of why I feel so exhausted and despondent at this point, 4 or 5 years in, because there was a period where I thought that problem had been exposed. On everything you just said, the siloing, that you're treating symptoms, the preponderance of top-down solutions and all of that. I thought it was going to get fixed. But then COVID brought it to a head. I thought, if it's become obvious to me, and I'm just an ordinary Joe, I'm just someone on the street, I thought we're going to get beyond this. And my despondency comes from thinking, no, it's almost as if something that was disturbed has just settled back down and has almost begun to calcify again.
We actually had faith that the systems would come good. But I think all three of us now have come to deeply, deeply question these systems that don't recognise truth, that don't accept the evidence.
Well, they don't accept uncertainty. They don't acknowledge uncertainty. That's a massive problem, is that people want to be certain about things, and it's like there's a lack of humility of looking at the human body and thinking, wow, this thing is really, really complicated, and you can't actually just go meddling around with it that easily, because it's the level of complexity is so beyond the cartoon models that you learn in medical school, for example. And we see the same now with things like climate, where they think that you can model the planet on a computer and then come up, not just do that, you can predict things and then come up with interventions that are just absurd. And I don't think you need to have expert knowledge to actually just stand back and say this is completely absurd. But it seems to be the more educated people are in this mainstream paradigm, the more susceptible they are to believing that these things work.
And it's just a whole lack of humility, isn't it? The idea that you understand how the body works and you can force a new intervention on it and predict it, and even that arrogantly say, look, this is safe and effective, when actually you haven't got a clue.
Well, that was the total absurdity when it came to the COVID vaccines. Yeah. I mean, how can you say something's safe and effective when you haven't got any long-term safety data and you haven't got time, which is the main ingredient that you need?
Am I right in thinking, I'm sure I read somewhere at the time that under a largely self-imposed code of ethics, that pharmaceutical companies didn't ever use the word safe because it's too... They wouldn't say that such and such. It's just safe to take.
It's not a scientific word.
Then you make yourself such a hostage to fortune. Yeah. If you sprinkle this on your baby, or if you put this in your stomach, it's safe. You can't, because there's 8 billion people, and any one of them might react in an unpredictable way, which would undermine it. And so that went out the window. Safe and effective, and then Trudy and I, as non-medical people, we watched the thing get to the point where they were pushing it into kids and then pushing it into pregnant women. And you think, well, you're not supposed to eat soft cheese or take a paracetamol when you're pregnant. No. How can that authority that's been saying that for generations now say, oh, it's safe and effective, and bang it into a pregnant woman? So I thought, there must be something at the subatomic level that's wrong here.
It's two completely different attitudes to risk, isn't it? One is sort of cavalier and overriding and arrogant and hubris, and the other is what you'd expect, a medical caution.
But it wasn't just the vaccines; it was the lockdowns too. Because I mean, there's strong arguments that the lockdowns were even worse. But what you really saw was a complete breakdown of medical ethics, where basically people were coerced or forced to take part in what was a terrible experiment that's really put huge amounts of national debts transferred, the lockdowns transferred a huge amount of wealth from the poorest to the most wealthiest. And people were just coerced to go along with this, with the complete breakdown of the fundamental principles of medicine, really, which is first do no harm and informed consent.
Where do you think it's come? Why have we arrived at this point where, to me, it seems that every reasonable person has had the opportunity to see the problem. All of these things and many more that we're discussing. And yet there's this, still seems to be this shoulders down, shrugging acceptance of, I thought people would be so incensed and or inspired or invigorated to shake up the system. But never mind what Big Pharma and Big Agri and all of the rest are continuing to do, because they're just following business models in pursuit of profit. But the people who are the victims of it all, having been shown, surely, that they are victims of this, too few of them are angry enough.
I think there's a distinction between America and here as well, because I think that there's been a bit more fatigue over here, perhaps, whereas over in America, there has been a bit more of a catalyst where people like Kennedy, you've just had a whole movement over there, which has said, look, we've got to do something about the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again. And we haven't really had that over here.
Why? What's missing here?
Well, I think what you described there, that people have been given all the information that people need to realise that they've been well and truly had over in many aspects of life, is there. But to get that, you've got to go back to primary sources of information. And most people don't go back to the primary sources of information. So I've been privileged. I've talked to leading people around the world that have actually done the primary research on this and have told me what's going on. But that doesn't get onto mainstream media. So most people don't go back to the primary source. What most people read is the summary article or the summary news bulletin that happens to be on at 6 p.m. on a major national news outlet. Most people get the news and the science constrained through the filter, or some might say propaganda, of a particular news organisation who has a particular agenda. That's part of my disillusionment, that I no longer trust the communicators. So the pure science to understand what has gone wrong is there. But people don't go back to that. They just get their news from a summary, which is understandable, a summary which is made palatable, a summary which is given in the context of a soundbite, and a summary which is often written and projected by people who have an interest, for whatever reason, in maintaining a particular narrative. So I think that's the answer, that people don't interrogate enough. They just take what is given to them. And the problem is they often trust the people that are giving them these summaries, no matter how distorted that summary is of the original data that was given. I think a lot of this is communication. And this is where what we're doing now and the new media is so important, that we can actually go from expert to me. We can go from international expert in Australia or the UK or wherever it is, direct to however many people want to click on the video. They're getting the primary source, unfiltered.
But for a while, that was under threat as well, wasn't it? Your show was potentially...
And
it still is. Even more to some extent. The censorship has tightened.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to draw broad conclusions from one example, but the number of people viewing content that I put out is going down. It's not going up, and it's possible that is just to do with people drifting away, not interested anymore. But
I talked about fatigue.
But I tend to think that a lot of content, my own included, is being suppressed because the algorithms are set to promote some content and to suppress other content. I've watched your numbers also hugely affected,
down dramatically.
So I look at my numbers, or Trudy will look at the numbers and she'll say, "Look at Dr. John. 6 months ago, that kind of thing. He would have, we look at other providers of content. Whatever, Russell Brand, everyone, even the really big names that command millions of subscribers. You can watch the numbers going down. So, and there's still stuff. Even in the face of, you would think that there were a truth-seeking society based on sound principles would welcome new media in that it's offering to a large audience alternative sources of information. But on the contrary, they're collapsing it down because they haven't learned. They don't want information getting out there to the people. They've realised that actually challenging and legitimate arguments are being made on these channels within that content. Yeah. We don't want that.
Yeah,
we can't challenge it.
Don't want scientific-based
We can't
arguments.
debate it, so we'll just shut it down. And there's laws going through, online safety bills and all of the rest of it, not just here, but it's in Australia, it's in Canada, it's across Europe, the EU are at it, it's there in America. This determination by the powers that be to, we can't have the general population openly discussing this stuff.
I think the very success of this new media, that we are going directly from primary source experts to the individual sitting at home, that is, I think a lot of people are seeing that as a threat. And because people have got large numbers of views from that, the threat has now been made real, and we're now suffering from a counter-offensive.
Do you think people just don't want to know?
I don't know how much.
I think people want to know.
I don't know how much the fatigue aspect is a part of this, actually, the sort of COVID fatigue. Because I do... When I speak to just people out and about, it seems that everybody acknowledges that what the government did was wrong, and the whole narrative just doesn't stack up, basically. But you'd think there'd be more outcry, right?
But it's not.
What happened was just look at what it did to our national debt.
So egregious, so much harm done. The numbers are there in the. The all-cause mortality and the excess deaths and all of the rest of it. I mean, the figures are staggering, and yet you would expect that the people would be out in the streets with pitchforks and flaming torches,
especially those that have lost loved ones. But I mean, to me, the COVID thing is one thing. That's one outrageous thing. But what it's done to me is basically cast light on what I now view as a corrupt or many corrupt systems. So. It's not just COVID. We've got nutrition is another one. Mm-hmm. When life begins and ends is another one. The narrative is controlled. Nutrition, the narrative is controlled. Geoengineering, again. So COVID to me was just the flare, if you like, that lit up the entrenched institutional problems that we've had for I don't know how long, potentially for.
Yeah, I was looking
decades.
at these problems way before COVID, and one of the benefits of the whole COVID era is it has connected. We wouldn't be sitting here now if that whole debacle hadn't happened. And so what it has done is has connected a lot of critical thinkers together, and you'd hope that there'd be enough critical mass for them to make a change, right?
How come you were so ahead of the game, Tim? This is kind of intriguing, because you were.
I think it goes back to that what I was saying earlier about having multiple perspectives on a problem. So I'm not an expert of anything, but I've got a lot of knowledge in a lot of different domains. So I see the world from lots of different angles. And really what the COVID thing really was, if a lot of the things that were being purported were plausible, but if you were looking at them from several different angles,
sophistry.
They weren't plausible. It's a bit like if you close one eye, you can get caught into illusions of distance of what things, where things are. But if you've got two eyes and your eyes are wide open, you can actually get stereoscopic vision. So it's kind of like that. But if you've got like 5 or 6 different knowledge domains and ways of looking at the world, I was just looking at it the tape was going up around children's play parks in the first week. I was in America when it happened, and I just knew immediately this is completely insane. And I'd kind of been predicting something like this because I've been following this idea of mind viruses, and the internet has become a very fast medium for bad ideas to transmit. Now, what the establishments, I think the establishment would recognize that, but they think that the solution is that you can censor your way out of that problem. But that doesn't work at all, because you create a massive positive feedback loop. If you shut down any form of dissent, you just get this loop going round and round where the bad belief takes hold, and the people who think that they control the narrative are actually the ones who are taken over by the bad idea. And that's kind of what happened. And you saw this huge loop, and I was actually looking at it very much like when we see a patient coming into the emergency room who has like an anaphylactic shock where the body has actually started attacking itself, and you've got the same sort of patterns of panic basically going on. I was seeing that playing out on a global scale. So I think that explains a lot of what we saw during that era. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, so basically what you're doing is you're seeing analogies between what's happening in your individual assessments of patients as a doctor and individual disease processes with much wider, broader systems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most bad diseases that I can think of, they have a positive feedback loop within them.
Yeah.
Where basically so something bad happens, so then that creates a loop, which means something else
worse.
bad happening. Yeah, so you see that. Anaphylaxis is a classic example where you just get this loop get completely out of control, and the body thinks it's doing the right thing, but actually it's closing up the airway, and the patient's dying basically if they're not treated. And the thing to do in that situation is you want to calm down the immune reaction. And so what we were having during the COVID era was this sort of immune reaction to the idea. So then the interventions for this idea that this terrible disease is coming along, that we need to intervene and do something. Well, they seem to completely forget that the interventions themselves are going to cause more damage than anything the original problem could have done.
The first do no harm principle, the precautionary principle.
First do no harm, exactly. So first do no harm went out the window on day one.
What I find is part of the disillusionment or the fatigue or whatever is the way in which even now the so much of the general anger is still directed at the people like us that we're trying to point out the problem, or we're saying, I think there might be something bad here.
Kill the messenger.
It's that idea of Jimmy Dore says, or one of the commentators says, he's forgiven his friends for being wrong, but they won't forgive him for having been right. And there's something very revealing, I think, and I don't even claim to understand it, about human nature, that even now when it's been made so apparent that the establishment, the big institutions, the NHS, the politicians, everything let everybody down so badly, there's more of an appetite for bygones be bygones and moving on and putting it behind us, while still being angry with people who were actually right all along. Mm-hmm. The forgiveness has been extended to the perpetrators of the crime. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the you know, like the little boy that stuck his finger in the dike to hold back the water is having his hand cut off for having had the temerity to do it. And I don't understand that. Matthias Desmet was very interesting with his idea about mass formation, psychosis.
Yeah,
where he posited the idea that in a society that is anguished anyway, a lot of people collectively and individually dealing with a lot of stress. It's like free-floating anxiety, he said, and it's looking a bit like the electric charge in the atmosphere. It's looking for something to connect it, to earth it. Mm-hmm. And I do, as I say, I'm aware of these ideas, and I know instinctively that he's onto something there, but I can't make sense of the way in which the people's anger, and it's there, is no longer really palpably directed at the people who did it. If they're angry with anyone, they're much more inclined to be angry with somebody like Russell Brand.
Yeah,
to latch onto that, because and yet all he did was spend a couple of years going, hold on, I think there's something severely wrong here.
I believe that's propaganda and disinformation. Nero burnt Rome and blamed the Christians. It wasn't the Christians that burnt Rome. And in the same way, the wrong people are being blamed now, and the people that are guilty and culpable, well, because of the control of the narrative, that is not evident to most people.
But don't you think it's also because the lie is so big?
Yeah.
The problem is so big.
It's so preposterous.
The people without even trying to get their heads around it just think, I think if I had to come to terms with that, it would mean root and branch, fundamental rethinking of everything I believe. My paradigms, all of it would have to go out the window.
This is brilliant. Yeah.
And so I think what I'll do is I'll just move on.
The position we three are in. That's the position.
Yeah, we talked about this before, John. Yeah. Exactly what you've just outlined. That if you imagine your belief system is all your beliefs are interconnected with each other, and for somebody to tell you, well, the whole era was just complete nonsense. Basically, everything they told you was the opposite of what you needed to do, or of the opposite of the truth, basically. Then there's a huge stress then that you would have to change all of your other beliefs, and so it's easier to just look away and just mind your own business and just potter on with what you're doing than actually acknowledge that a lot of your entire belief system is built on sand.